The explosion tore through the night like the hand of God reaching down to split the yacht in half.
Is everything
Imani
okay?
felt the
Yes,
force
just
of it before she
monitoring.
heard
Any
the
pain? A
sound,
little, right
a
there.
pressure
Okay,
wave
breathe
that
for me.
compressed
That's
her
normal.
chest and sent the medical stretcher sliding across the cabin floor, despite the restraints holding her in place. The monitors attached to her body shrieked in protest, their steady beeps transforming into urgent alarms that competed with the klaxon wailing throughout the vessel. Her hands instinctively moved to her swollen belly, protecting the two lives that had been her constant companions for 23 weeks. 23 weeks that felt simultaneously like an eternity and not nearly long enough. The babies kicked in response to the chaos, their movements frantic beneath her palms. Dr. Cho appeared above her, the Korean woman's usually composed face tight with controlled fear. Her hands moved efficiently across the monitors, checking readings even as the yacht listed hard to starboard. "Vital stable," she said, her accented English clipped and professional. "No contractions yet. We might make it." The second explosion cut her off. This one was closer, louder, and immediately followed by sounds that made Imani's blood run cold. The sharp crack of gunfire, shouting in Korean, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the deck above them. Water began seeping under the cabin door, a dark stain spreading across the polished wood floor with terrifying speed. Through the ceiling, Imani could hear them fighting. She knew without seeing that Dae-Jung would be moving with that lethal grace she'd witnessed countless times, each motion precise and economical. Sung-Ho would be beside him, broader and more powerful, using brute force where his brother used finesse. And Min-woo, the third man in their complicated alliance, would be covering their flanks with the tactical precision of someone who'd survived too many battles to make careless mistakes. The yacht lurched violently. Imani's stretcher slammed against the bulkhead hard enough to rattle her teeth. Dr. Cho grabbed the edge to steady herself, her medical bag sliding across the floor before fetching up against a built-in cabinet. "We need to get you off this boat," Dr. Cho said, already working to release the stretcher's wheel locks. "The way this vessel is taking on water—" She never finished the sentence. The cabin door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and twisted metal. Imani screamed, throwing her arms over her face as debris rained down. When she lowered them, a figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the chaos of the deck beyond, emergency lighting, smoke, and what looked like bodies. The figure stepped forward, and Imani saw it was a man in tactical gear, his face obscured by a balaclava, an assault rifle raised and pointed directly at her pregnant belly. "Don't move," he commanded in Korean-accented English. The sound that followed was something between a roar and a battle cry. Sung-Ho appeared from nowhere, tackling the armed man with enough force to send them both crashing into the ruined doorframe. The rifle discharged, the sound deafening in the confined space. Imani felt something hot streak past her shoulder, not a direct hit but close enough that she felt the bullet's passage like a brand against her skin. Then she felt something else, a warm wetness spreading down her left arm. When she looked, blood was seeping through her hospital gown, dark and viscous in the emergency lighting. "I'm hit," she heard herself say, her voice distant and strange to her own ears. "I'm hit." Dr. Cho was already there, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, even as the yacht continued its death throes around them. She cut away the fabric of Imani's gown, exposing the wound. "Graze," she announced, her voice tight but controlled. "The bullet barely caught you. You're bleeding, but it's not life-threatening." But even as the doctor spoke, Imani felt something that made the bullet wound insignificant by comparison, a tightening across her abdomen, a pressure that started low and built with terrifying intensity. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Another contraction followed the first, harder and faster than should have been possible. Dr. Cho's hands flew to Imani's belly, her face transforming from concerned to horrified in the space of a heartbeat. "She's in labor," Dr. Cho shouted toward the doorway where Sung-Ho had disappeared with the armed man. "The trauma triggered it. She's in active labor at 23 weeks. The words seemed to echo through the sinking yacht, reaching up through the chaos to the men fighting on the deck above. Imani heard Dae-Jung's voice, sharp and commanding even from a distance, issuing orders in rapid Korean. Then Dr. Cho's face appeared above her again, and in the doctor's eyes, Imani saw something that terrified her more than the gunfire or the sinking boat or the blood on her arm. She saw fear. "Imani, listen to me very carefully," Dr. Cho said, her hands already moving to position the stretcher to gather her scattered medical supplies. "Your body is in full labor. Contractions are less than 2 minutes apart. If I don't deliver these babies right now, your uterus will rupture and all 3 of you will die. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Imani's hands tightened on her belly, feeling another contraction building like a wave about to break. 23 weeks. Her babies were only 23 weeks old. They weren't supposed to come yet. They needed more time, more weeks, more everything. "Save them," she gasped as the contraction peaked, stealing her breath and her ability to think beyond the immediate, all-consuming pain. "Whatever it takes, save my babies." Dr. Cho was already moving, pulling supplies from her emergency kit with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice in impossible situations. A ketamine injection appeared in her hand, not enough for full surgical anesthesia, but enough to take the edge off what was about to happen. "This is going to hurt," Dr. Cho said, and there was genuine sorrow in her voice. "I'm so sorry, Imani. This is going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt." The needle pierced Imani's arm. The drug hit her system like a wave of cotton and distance, softening the edges of the world without truly removing her from it. She could still feel everything, but it was as if it was happening to someone else, some other woman on some other sinking yacht. Through the haze of ketamine and pain and terror, she heard sounds filtering down from the deck. More gunfire, Dae-Jung's voice raised in what sounded like negotiation, and another voice, older and female, speaking in Korean with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The yacht tilted further. Water was pouring into the cabin now, ankle deep and rising fast. Dr. Cho worked with hands that never trembled despite the impossible circumstances, her face set in lines of fierce concentration. "I need you to stay with me," Dr. Cho commanded. "Look at me, Imani. Don't close your eyes. Stay present." Imani tried to focus on the doctor's face, but her vision kept sliding away to other things. The water rising around the stretcher legs, the ceiling above her, tilting at an angle that defied physics. The medical instruments in Dr. Cho's hands, gleaming and terrible in the emergency lighting. Then the scalpel touched her skin, and even through the ketamine, Imani felt everything. She screamed. The sound tore from her throat raw and primal, the cry of a mother fighting for her children's lives with the only weapon she had left, her own body, her own blood, her own willingness to endure anything if it meant they survived. Dr. Cho worked with a speed that bordered on reckless, her hands moving through layers of tissue and muscle, with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but never under conditions like these. Blood mixed with seawater on the cabin floor. The monitors continued their frantic beeping, and somewhere above them, the fighting continued. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Then Dr. Cho's hands came away from Imani's body, holding something impossibly small, impossibly fragile, a baby no bigger than her 2 hands pressed together. "Ha-yoon," Dr. Cho announced, and immediately began working on the infant with practiced efficiency, clearing airways, stimulating breathing. But the baby remained silent and blue, her tiny chest still. Dr. Cho laid the infant on Imani's chest, kangaroo care, skin-to-skin contact that could sometimes stimulate breathing in premature babies, and began infant CPR with 2 fingers, pressing on a chest the size of a deck of cards. "Come on," she muttered in Korean, then English. "Come on, baby girl, breathe." 15 seconds, 20, 25, then the tiniest gasp Imani had ever heard, followed by a weak cry that was more kitten than human. Ha-yoon was breathing, barely, irregularly, but breathing. Dr. Cho had no time to celebrate. She passed the infant to Imani, hold her against your chest, keep her warm, and returned to the emergency C-section that was still only half complete. twin B came into the world in silence. Misun was even smaller than her sister, her skin not just pale but translucent, showing the delicate tracery of veins beneath. She didn't gasp, didn't cry, didn't move at all except for the way her tiny body went limp in Dr. Cho's hands. "No," Imani heard herself say, the word more prayer than protest. "No, please, no." Dr. Cho worked on Misun with an intensity that bordered on violence. CPR, stimulation, clearing her airways again and again. But the baby remained silent and still, her color darkening from pale to blue to a shade that made Imani's heart stop. The yacht lurched again, tilting to nearly 45 degrees. Dr. Cho lost her footing, catching herself against the stretcher. Supplies scattered across the flooding cabin. The water was knee-deep now, and Imani realized with distant horror that they were going down. The yacht was sinking, and they were still trapped in the cabin with 2 infants who might not survive the next 5 minutes. "We have to move," Dr. Cho said, her voice strained but determined. "Now. The boat won't stay afloat much longer." She wrapped both babies in a specialized thermal blanket designed for extreme premature births, barely larger than a hand towel, but lined with technology that would help regulate their minimal body heat. Ha-Yoon was still breathing in short, irregular gasps. Misun remained ominously silent, her tiny chest motionless. Getting Imani off the stretcher while she was still bleeding from an emergency C-section performed on a sinking boat should have been impossible. But Dr. Cho managed it with a combination of medical expertise and sheer determination, supporting Imani's weight while cradling both babies against her chest with one arm. They made it to the cabin door just as the yacht rolled further. Imani screamed as the motion tore at her surgical wound, fresh blood streaming down her legs to mix with the seawater that was now waist-deep in the cabin. Dr. Cho held her up, one hand gripping Imani's arm, the other still protecting the babies. The stairs to the deck were completely underwater now. They had to climb, pulling themselves up using whatever handholds they could find. Every movement was agony for Imani. Her vision grayed at the edges, threatening to collapse into darkness, but she forced herself to keep moving. If she passed out, they all died. It was that simple. When they finally emerged onto the deck, the scene that greeted them was something from a nightmare. Bodies lay scattered across the white fiberglass decking, some in tactical gear, others in suits that had once been expensive but were now torn and blood-soaked. The storm had intensified, wind whipping across the tilting yacht with enough force to make standing nearly impossible. Rain mixed with seawater, creating a slick surface that reflected the emergency lighting in fractured patterns of red and white. Dae-Jung stood near the bow, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt plastered to his lean frame and spotted with blood. Whether his own or someone else's, Imani couldn't tell from this distance. Sung-Ho was beside him, looking barely better, his broader shoulders hunched slightly as he pressed a hand to his side where blood was seeping between his fingers. Min-woo completed the triangle, his lighter eyes scanning the perimeter even as he favored his left leg. Between them and safety stood a figure that made Imani's blood run even colder than the wind whipping across the deck. Grandmother Choi was exactly as Imani had imagined her from the stories Dae-Jung had told during their long nights together. A woman of perhaps 70, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon that somehow hadn't been disturbed despite the chaos around her. She wore a traditional black hanbok that should have looked absurd on a sinking yacht surrounded by armed men and carnage, but instead made her look like death personified. Her face was serene, almost peaceful, as she surveyed the scene with eyes that had witnessed too much violence over too many decades to be moved by it anymore. 10 men stood with her, all armed with military-grade weapons, all pointing their rifles at the brothers with the kind of casual professionalism that suggested they'd done this many times before. "And here she is," Grandmother Choi said, in accented but perfect English, her gaze fixing on Imani with the kind of intensity that made her feel simultaneously seen and dissected. The foreign woman carrying the prophecy children. How disappointing that they've arrived early. The blood moon was very specific about timing. Imani didn't understand what the old woman was talking about: prophecy, blood moon, timing, and she didn't care. Her babies, Ha-Yoon still breathing in tiny gasps against Dr. Cho's chest, Mi-sun still terrifyingly silent and unmoving, needed medical care that a sinking yacht in the middle of a storm couldn't provide. As if summoned by her desperate thoughts, she heard it, the distinctive whoomp-whoomp-whoomp of helicopter rotors cutting through the wind and rain. A spotlight swept across the yacht, illuminating the carnage in stark, unforgiving detail. Bodies, blood, the brothers standing defiant despite their wounds, Grandmother Choi's serene face, and Dr. Cho, holding two impossibly small infants who might already be beyond saving. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker, speaking in Korean, too rapid for Imani to follow even if she'd been in a state to process language properly. "Rescue," Dae-Jung said, his dark eyes finding Imani across the deck. Even from 20 feet away, she could see the calculation happening behind those eyes, the same ruthless cost-benefit analysis that had made him one of Seoul's most dangerous men. "But the storm is too strong. The pilot says they can only take 4 people safely. Any more weight and we'll all go down." Dr. Cho shifted the babies in her arms, and Imani saw the doctor's face transform as she processed the mathematics of survival. 6 people plus 2 infants, 4 spots on the helicopter. Someone, multiple someones, had to stay behind on a yacht that was sinking fast. "Imani is hemorrhaging," Dr. Cho called out, her voice cutting through the wind and helicopter noise with the authority of someone used to being heard in crisis situations. "She needs surgery within the hour or she'll bleed out. Ha-Yoon is critical but stable. She needs NICU care immediately." "Mi-sun?" She looked down at the silent baby in her arms, and her face said everything her words didn't. Mi-sun was dying, maybe already dead. "Take Imani and Ha-Yoon," Dae-Jung said immediately, already moving toward them across the tilting deck, his movement still graceful despite the chaos. "Dr. Cho goes with them. I'll stay with my brother and keep Mi-sun alive until the second helicopter arrives." "There might not be a second helicopter," the pilot's voice crackled over the radio, speaking English now for everyone's benefit. The international language of disaster. "This storm is getting worse by the minute. I can barely keep this bird stable as it is. If the wind picks up anymore, I won't be able to hold position long enough for anyone to board." Grandmother Choi laughed, a sound like dried leaves rustling in a graveyard, somehow audible even over the storm. "Or," she said, and the single word cut through everything else with the weight of authority she carried, "you give me the babies now, both of them. I have a helicopter standing by just beyond the storm front, equipped with a full NICU setup, the best medical care money can buy. The babies will live. You 3 can leave on your rescue helicopter. Everyone wins." She smiled, and it was the coldest expression Imani had ever seen on a human face. "Except, of course, the babies will belong to me, to the 5 families, to their destiny. But they'll be alive, which is more than they'll be if you try to save everyone and end up saving no one." "No," Imani said, the word barely audible over the storm but weighted with every ounce of strength she had left in her torn, bleeding body. "Never." Dae-Jung reached Dr. Cho and carefully, with surprising gentleness for a man with hands that had killed more people than Imani wanted to think about, took Ha-Yoon from the doctor's arms. The baby looked even smaller in his large hands, her 1-pound body barely filling his palm. He cradled her with the kind of care one might use handling ancient, priceless porcelain, his long fingers supporting her oversized head, exactly as he'd been taught during those NICU preparation classes that now seemed like they'd happened in another lifetime. Then he looked at Sung-Ho, and something passed between the brothers, some wordless communication that came from years of rivalry and alliance, and the complicated bond that existed between men who were both family and enemies. "Take Mi-sun," Dae-Jung said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Keep her alive. That's all you have to do. Just keep her alive until help comes." Sung-Ho crossed the deck, his injured side making him move with uncharacteristic stiffness, and accepted the silent infant from Dr. Cho's arms. Mi-sun was even smaller than her sister, her 15-ounce body so light she seemed to weigh nothing at all, as if she were made of air and hope rather than flesh and blood. Sung-Ho looked down at her, and Imani saw something break behind his eyes, some final wall he'd been maintaining crumbling in the face of holding a dying infant. "She's not breathing," he said, his voice cracking in a way Imani had never heard before. Sung-Ho, who'd faced down-armed gangs and survived knife fights and remained calm through situations that would break most men, was breaking now. What do I... "Infant CPR," Dr. Cho said rapidly, already helping Imani toward the rope ladder that had been lowered from the hovering helicopter. 2 fingers on the center of the chest, press down about 1/3 the depth of the chest. For her, that's barely anything. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Repeat until she responds or help arrives. I'll walk you through it over the radio if you need guidance. The yacht rolled again, and everyone grabbed for handholds. Water was pouring over the gunwales now, the vessel taking on water faster than the pumps could handle. They had minutes, maybe less, before the yacht went under entirely and took everyone still on board down with it. "Go," Dae-Jung commanded, and it wasn't a suggestion, it was the voice of a man who'd built an empire by being obeyed without question. He was already moving toward the ladder with Ha-Yoon, one hand cradling the baby against his chest, the other gripping the rope with practiced ease. "Dr. Cho, help Imani up. We'll be right behind you." It was a lie. They all knew it was a lie. The mathematics were inescapable. There wouldn't be room for everyone. Someone was staying behind. Multiple someones. But Imani didn't have the strength left to argue, and Dr. Cho was already helping her toward the ladder, supporting her weight as each step sent fresh waves of agony through her torn abdomen. Getting a woman who'd just undergone an emergency C-section up a rope ladder, while a yacht sank beneath her in the middle of a storm, should have been impossible. That Imani managed it at all was a testament to either human determination or human desperation. She wasn't sure which, and it didn't matter. Her hands found the rope. Her feet found purchase on the swaying ladder, and inch by agonizing inch, she climbed toward the helicopter hovering 30 feet above the deck. Halfway up, she looked back. Sung-Ho stood on the tilting deck, his massive frame hunched over the tiny infant in his arms, his fingers already moving in the careful rhythm of infant CPR that Dr. Cho had described. Min-woo was beside him, wounded but conscious, helping to stabilize Sung-Ho's position as the yacht rolled, and Dae-Jung stood between them and Grandmother Choi. Ha-Yoon somehow still safe in his arms despite the chaos, his body language making it crystal clear that anyone who wanted to reach the babies would have to go through him first. Grandmother Choi's men were advancing, weapons raised, and Imani realized with cold certainty that her family, because that's what they were now, what they'd become through blood and fire and impossible choices, was about to die on that sinking yacht while she watched helplessly from above. Then Dr. Cho was pulling Imani into the helicopter, and the world became the howl of rotors and the organized chaos of emergency medical personnel. Someone, a paramedic, young and Korean and speaking rapid-fire English, was already working on Imani, checking her vitals, applying pressure to stop the bleeding that was still seeping through the makeshift bandages Dr. Cho had applied in the cabin. Another set of hands carefully took Ha-Yoon from Dae-Jung as he climbed aboard, immediately beginning assessment of the tiny infant. The helicopter began to lift, and Imani felt her stomach drop as they rose into the storm. "Wait!" she gasped, trying to sit up despite the hands holding her down, despite the straps being fastened across her chest. "Sung-Ho, Min-woo, Mi-sun, we can't leave them. We have to," the pilot shouted back, his voice strained. "We're already over weight limit with 5 people. The storm will bring us down if we try to take more. I'm sorry, but it's this or everyone dies." Through the helicopter's open door, Imani could see the yacht continuing its death spiral into the dark water below. She could see Sung-Ho still standing on the deck, still performing CPR on an infant who might already be beyond saving. She could see Min-woo beside him, blood visible even from this distance. She could see Grandmother Choi and her men moving closer, weapons raised, closing in like wolves on wounded prey. Then Dae-Jung's hand found hers, his grip tight enough to hurt, and when she looked at him, she saw something in his face she'd never seen before: naked, unconcealed fear. Not the controlled concern of a man calculating odds, but genuine terror at what they were leaving behind. "He'll save her," Dae-Jung said, but his voice shook in a way that made the words sound like a prayer rather than a statement of fact. "My brother will save her. He has to. He has to, because I can't lose both of them. I can't—" His voice broke, and Imani realized she was witnessing something she'd never thought she'd see. Dae-Jung Ri, one of Seoul's most dangerous men, a person who'd built an empire on ruthless calculation and emotional control, was falling apart. The helicopter banked hard, turning away from the sinking yacht. The last thing Imani saw before they disappeared into the storm clouds was Sung-Ho, a tiny figure on a dying boat, cradling an infant who might already be dead, while Grandmother Choi's men closed in around him like a tightening noose. Then there was only darkness and the sound of Ha-Yoon's weak, irregular breathing, and Dr. Cho's calm voice calling out measurements and statistics that meant nothing to Imani but everything to the medical personnel working to keep them all alive. "Blood pressure dropping," someone said, the words clinical and distant. "She needs immediate transfusion," someone else added, hands already moving to establish additional IV lines. "The baby's oxygen saturation is critical. We need to intubate." ETA to Seoul General is 7 minutes. 7 minutes. It might as well have been 7 years. Imani's vision was graying at the edges, her consciousness slipping away despite her desperate attempts to hold on. She needed to stay awake, needed to know if Ha-Yoon would survive, needed to know if Sung-Ho had managed to save Mi-sun, needed to know if they would ever see each other again, or if this helicopter ride was carrying her away from half her family forever. But the darkness was rising like water in a sinking ship, and Imani was drowning in it. The last thing she heard before consciousness left her entirely was Dae-Jung's voice, breaking on words she'd never thought she'd hear from him, words that rewrote everything she thought she knew about the man who'd trapped her and controlled her and somehow, impossibly, fallen in love with her. "Don't leave me," he said, and his hand tightened on hers with desperate strength. "Please, God, don't leave me. I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. I should have said it before. I should have told you every day. I love you, Imani, so you don't get to leave me now. You don't get to die. Do you understand? You have to live. You have to—" Then the darkness took her completely, and Imani Cross knew nothing at all. On the sinking yacht, Sung-Ho pressed 2 fingers against Mi-sun's sternum, so small, so impossibly fragile, and counted. 1, 2, 3. His hands were shaking, making it hard to maintain the proper rhythm, but he forced them steady through sheer willpower. 30 compressions. Then he bent down, his mouth covering the infant's nose and mouth completely because she was too small for anything else, and gave 2 gentle breaths. Not too hard, he could rupture her lungs. Not too soft, she needed the oxygen. Finding that balance while standing on a tilting, sinking yacht with armed men closing in was possibly the hardest thing he'd ever done. The baby remained silent and still. "Come on," he muttered, starting the compressions again. "Come on, little one. Your mama fought for you. Your sister needs you. I need you. Please." 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The rhythm was burned into his brain now, a mantra that kept him moving even as exhaustion and blood loss threatened to drag him down into darkness. Min-woo stood beside him, one hand pressed to his own wounded side, the other holding a radio he'd salvaged from one of the fallen attackers. "Second helicopter is inbound," he said, his voice tight with pain. "ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Sung-Ho didn't know if Mi-sun had 12 minutes. He didn't know if any of them had 12 minutes. The yacht was listing at nearly 60 degrees now, water pouring across the deck with each wave, the vessel groaning like a dying animal as it prepared to make its final descent. Bodies slid past them, some of Grandmother Choi's men who'd been caught in the crossfire, some of Dae-Jung's security team who'd fought to protect them. The deck was slick with blood and seawater, making footing treacherous. Grandmother Choi herself stood 20 feet away, flanked by her remaining guards. She'd made no move to approach since the first helicopter left, but Sung-Ho could feel her eyes on him, calculating and cold, weighing options with the same ruthless precision that had kept her alive and powerful for 7 decades in a world that didn't tolerate weakness. "You're wasting your time," she called out over the storm, her voice somehow carrying despite the wind. "That baby is already dead. Give her to me. I'll ensure she has a proper burial at least, more dignity than she'll get when this yacht goes down and her body is lost to the sea." "She's not dead," Sung-Ho snarled, not stopping his compressions, not even looking up at the old woman. "She's not dead because I won't let her be dead. Do you understand? I won't let her die." 30 compressions, 2 breaths. His fingers were going numb from the repetitive motion and the cold. His injured side was screaming in protest, the wound bleeding freely now, soaking through his shirt. But he kept moving, kept counting, kept breathing life into the tiny infant who weighed almost nothing in his hands. "Noble," Grandmother Choi observed, taking a step closer. Her guards moved with her. A synchronized dance they'd clearly performed many times. But ultimately futile. Even if you do revive her, even if the helicopter arrives in time, what then? She's premature, critically so. The odds of her surviving, even with the best medical care, are better than 0, Sung-Ho interrupted, his voice harsh, "which is what they'll be if I stop. So unless you're planning to shoot me, I suggest you shut up and let me work." 30 compressions, 2 breaths, 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Then, like a miracle he didn't deserve and hadn't dared hope for, he felt it, the smallest flutter beneath his fingers, a heartbeat, weak and irregular and barely there, but present, real, proof of life where there had been none. "She's got a pulse," he gasped, not daring to believe it, afraid that if he acknowledged it too loudly, the universe would take it back. "Minwoo, she's got a pulse." Minwoo was there immediately, his radio forgotten, dropping to his knees beside Sung-Ho to help stabilize the infant's position. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said urgently. "The helicopter is 8 minutes out now. Just keep her alive for 8 more minutes. You can do 8 minutes. 8 minutes. Sung-Ho could do 8 minutes. He could do 8 minutes if it killed him, which, given the amount of blood he was losing, and the fact that Grandmother Choi's men were slowly closing in, weapons raised, it very well might. The yacht gave a massive groan, metal tearing and buckling, and rolled further. They were running out of deck. Soon there would be nowhere left to stand, and then they'd all be in the water, and Mi-sun, fragile, barely alive Mi-sun, would have no chance at all. "Minwoo," Sung-Ho said quietly, his eyes never leaving the baby in his hands, watching for any sign that her tenuous hold on life was slipping. "If it comes down to it, if they try to take her before the helicopter arrives, you know what to do." Minwoo's hand moved to the weapon holstered at his side, and his voice was equally quiet when he responded. "I know, brother. I know." In the helicopter, Imani's eyes fluttered open. The first thing she registered was pain, a vast, all-encompassing agony that seemed to originate from her abdomen and radiate outward to every nerve ending in her body. It was the kind of pain that made thinking difficult, that narrowed the world down to just the sensation of hurt and the desperate desire for it to stop. The second thing was the sound of medical equipment beeping urgently around her, competing with the roar of the helicopter rotors. The third thing was Dae-Jung's face, hovering above her, and the naked relief that flooded his features when he saw her eyes open. "Welcome back," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion he wasn't bothering to hide anymore. The mask was gone. The careful control had shattered. What remained was just a man, terrified and desperate and clinging to hope. "You scared me. You scared me so badly." "Ha-Yoon," Imani managed to croak out, her throat raw from intubation she didn't remember. Where's my baby?" "Right here." Dr. Cho moved into her line of sight, and Imani could see the makeshift incubator setup they'd rigged in the helicopter's cabin. Inside, barely visible beneath all the medical equipment, tubes and wires and monitors that seemed impossibly large for such a tiny patient, was Ha-Yoon. Still so small, still so fragile. But the monitor showed a heartbeat, steady and stronger than it had been. "She's stable," Dr. Cho said, and there was cautious optimism in her voice. "Oxygen saturation is improving. We got her on the ventilator just in time. She's fighting, Imani. She's fighting hard." "And Mi-sun?" Imani asked, though she was afraid of the answer, afraid of what the silence that followed her question might mean. "Sung-Ho? Did the second helicopter?" Dae-Jung's face closed down, becoming something harder and more controlled, though she could still see the fear lurking beneath the surface. "We don't know yet. The second helicopter should be reaching them soon. Any minute now. Sung-Ho is strong. He'll keep her alive. He has to." Should be, not had, not did, should be. Which meant they were still out there, still fighting, still trying to keep that impossibly small infant alive against odds that were stacked impossibly high against them. 2 minutes to landing, the pilot announced over the headset. "Medical team is standing by on the roof. Prepare for descent." The helicopter descended through the storm, and Imani felt every meter of altitude loss, like a physical blow to her already traumatized body. The pain was trying to pull her back under, trying to make her escape into unconsciousness where nothing could hurt anymore. But she forced herself to stay present. She had to know, had to see Ha-Yoon safely to the hospital, had to wait for word about Mi-sun and Sung-Ho, had to survive this, because her daughters needed her, both of them, even if one of them might already be. No, she couldn't think that way, wouldn't think that way. Sung-Ho would save her. He had to save her. The landing was rough, the helicopter's skids hitting the hospital helipad with a jolt that made Imani scream despite her best efforts to stay quiet. Then there were hands everywhere, a dozen people all moving with practiced efficiency, transferring her to a gurney while others carefully moved Ha-Yoon's incubator, maintaining all the connections and monitoring even as they rushed toward the elevator that would take them down to the trauma bay. "Ha-Yoon," Imani gasped, trying to see the incubator through the crowd of medical personnel surrounding her gurney. I have to, she's coming," Dr. Cho assured her, staying close despite the chaos. "Right behind us. I won't leave her side. I promise you, Imani, I won't let anything happen to her." The elevator doors closed, and Imani caught one last glimpse of Dae-Jung standing on the helipad, his blood-stained clothes plastered to his body by rain and seawater, his phone pressed to his ear as he presumably tried to get word about his brother and Mi-sun. Then she was being rushed down a corridor, fluorescent lights flickering past overhead in a strobe effect that made her nausea worse. Voices called out medical jargon she didn't understand, numbers and abbreviations and urgent commands that all blended together into white noise. Someone was inserting additional IV lines. Someone else was cutting away what remained of her blood-soaked hospital gown, exposing her to the cold air of the hospital corridor. The world narrowed to the ceiling tiles passing overhead and the urgent voices of people trying to save her life. "Get OR3 prepped," someone commanded with authority. "Page Dr. Kim. Tell him we're coming in hot with a postpartum hemorrhage, emergency C-section performed in field conditions. She's critical. Blood pressure is still dropping. Type and cross-match for 6 units. The baby goes straight to NICU level 4. Dr. Cho will accompany and provide handoff to the neonatal team. Move, people! We don't have time for delays." The operating room doors burst open, and Imani was wheeled into a space that was all bright lights and masked faces and the smell of antiseptic that couldn't quite cover the metallic scent of blood. Her blood, she realized with distant horror. She felt the anesthesia beginning to take hold. That strange floating sensation that meant consciousness was slipping away again. But before it took her completely, before the darkness could claim her once more, she grabbed the nearest person's sleeve. A surgeon, she thought, based on the scrubs and the authority in his stance. "My other daughter," she slurred, the words thick and clumsy in her mouth. "Mi-sun, when she gets here, you have to promise me you'll—" "We'll take care of her," the surgeon said, and his voice was kind beneath the professional efficiency. "We'll take care of all of you, both your babies. You have my word. Now let the medication work. Close your eyes. We've got you." The darkness rose up and claimed her, and this time Imani didn't fight it. She let it take her down into depths where there was no pain, no fear, no awareness of the surgical team working frantically to save her life. Back on the yacht, Sung-Ho felt the vessel give what he knew would be its final death throes. The deck was almost vertical now, tilted at an angle that made standing nearly impossible. Water washed over them with each wave, soaking them to the bone, threatening to sweep them all into the churning sea. Mi-sun's heartbeat continued its fragile flutter beneath Sung-Ho's fingers. He'd been doing rescue breathing for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 25 minutes. His arms burned with exhaustion. His lungs ached from the repeated exhalations. His wounded side had gone from screaming pain to an ominous numbness that probably meant he was losing too much blood, that he was running out of time just as surely as the yacht was running out of buoyancy. But the baby was alive. That tiny, irregular heartbeat beneath his fingers was proof that miracles could happen, that impossible things could be achieved through nothing more than stubborn refusal to accept defeat. 2 minutes, Min-woo shouted over the storm, his voice hoarse. "The helicopter is 2 minutes out. We're going to make it, brother. We're actually going to make it." Grandmother Choi had retreated to her own boat, a sleek, modern vessel that bobbed in the waves 50 yards away, its powerful engines keeping it stable despite the storm. Her men had followed her, apparently deciding that whatever prophecy they'd been chasing wasn't worth drowning for. Sung-Ho could see the boat's lights through the rain and spray, could see figures moving on its deck. They were leaving, abandoning the sinking yacht and everyone on it. Which should have been good news, except, "Something's wrong," Min-woo said suddenly, his tone sharp with alarm. "She's pulling away too fast. She's not just retreating, she's—" The explosion came without warning. One moment the yacht was sinking slowly, groaning but still intact. The next, fire bloomed from somewhere below deck, and the vessel shuddered like a dying animal. Sung-Ho felt himself being thrown sideways, felt his grip on Mi-sun start to slip, and in that moment of pure panic, he made a choice. He tucked the baby against his chest, wrapping his body around her, and let himself fall. Better to hit the deck with his own body than to risk dropping her, than to risk any impact reaching her fragile form. He hit hard, the breath driven from his lungs, fresh agony exploding from his wounded side. But Mi-sun was safe against his chest, protected by his arms and torso, and when he managed to draw breath again, he could still feel that tiny, precious heartbeat fluttering against his own. "She did it on purpose," Min-woo was saying, his voice distant through the ringing in Sung-Ho's ears. "Grandmother Choi, she scuttled the yacht. She's trying to kill us all." The helicopter appeared out of the storm like salvation itself, its spotlight illuminating the wreckage and the 2 men clinging to the tilting deck with an infant cradled between them. A rescue harness descended, swinging wildly in the wind. "You first," Sung-Ho said to Min-woo, struggling to his feet, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through his body. "With her, take Mi-sun up. I'll follow." "Like hell," Min-woo shot back, already reaching for the harness. "You're bleeding out. You go first with the baby. I'll be right behind you. That's not a suggestion, brother. That's an order." They didn't have time to argue. The yacht gave another massive shudder, and Sung-Ho realized with cold certainty that they had seconds, not minutes, before it went under completely and took them with it. Sung-Ho secured Mi-sun against his chest with what remained of the thermal blanket, creating a makeshift sling that would keep her safe during the ascent. His hands shook as he worked, whether from blood loss or exhaustion or fear, he couldn't tell anymore. Everything was blending together, the pain, the cold, the desperate need to get this tiny infant to safety. He clipped into the harness with one arm wrapped protectively around the baby, the other gripping the line with whatever strength he had left. Mi-sun whimpered against his chest, a sound so small he might have imagined it, but it was there. She was alive. Still alive, and he was going to keep her that way if it was the last thing he ever did. "Go!" Min-woo shouted, and Sung-Ho felt the winch engage, lifting him away from the dying yacht. The ascent seemed to take forever. Wind buffeted them, threatening to slam Sung-Ho against the helicopter's side. Rain lashed at his face, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. Mi-sun's cries grew stronger against his chest, weak, mewling sounds that were the most beautiful thing he'd ever heard because they meant she was still fighting, still holding on. Every rotation of the winch brought them higher, away from the yacht that was now listing at nearly 90 degrees. Its bow pointing toward the sky while its stern disappeared beneath the waves, away from the deck where bodies floated in the rising water, away from Grandmother Choi's boat, already a distant set of lights disappearing into the storm. Then hands were grabbing him, pulling him into the helicopter's cabin. A paramedic immediately reached for Mi-sun, but Sung-Ho couldn't make his arms release her. He'd fought too hard, held on too long, breathed life into her too many times to let her go now. His body wouldn't obey the command to open his arms. "Sir," the paramedic said gently, her voice cutting through his shock. "Sir, I need to check her vitals. You did an amazing job keeping her alive, but I need to assess her condition now, please. Let me help her." Sung-Ho's arms slowly unlocked, every muscle protesting as he allowed the paramedic to take the infant. Mi-sun immediately protested the loss of contact, her tiny face scrunching up as she cried with more strength than she'd shown before. Her color was terrible, still too pale, still too blue, but she was breathing. On her own, without his help. "That's a good sign," the paramedic said, already working to assess the baby with practiced efficiency. "She's got fight in her. Respiratory effort is weak but present. Heart rate is low but steady. We need to get her on oxygen immediately and maintain her body temperature." She looked up at Sung-Ho, and he saw her eyes widen as she took in his appearance, the blood soaking through his shirt, the pallor of his skin, the way he was swaying on his feet. "Get a gurney over here," she called to her colleagues. "We've got 2 critical patients, not 1. Through the open helicopter door, Sung-Ho could see them lowering the harness for Min-woo. His friend was halfway up when the yacht finally gave up its battle with the sea. The vessel rolled completely, water rushing in to claim it with terrifying speed, and then it was gone, slipping beneath the waves as if it had never existed at all. Then Min-woo was being pulled into the helicopter, soaking wet and bleeding but alive, and they were banking away from the wreckage, heading toward Seoul and the hospital where Imani and Ha-yoon waited. "Blood pressure critical," one of the paramedics said, and Sung-Ho realized with distant surprise that they were talking about him. "Systolic is under 90. He's lost too much blood. We need to move fast or we'll lose him." He tried to protest that he was fine, that they should focus on Mi-sun, that the baby was what mattered, but the words wouldn't come. His vision was narrowing to a tunnel, darkness creeping in from all sides, like a tide he couldn't hold back. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness took him was Mi-sun, impossibly tiny in the paramedic's hands, her chest rising and falling with breaths she was taking on her own. He'd done it. He'd saved Dae-Jung's daughter, his brother's child, the baby who wasn't his biologically but was his in every way that mattered because he'd breathed life into her lungs and refused to let her die. And then there was nothing but darkness. Dae-Jung stood in the hallway outside the trauma bay, his phone pressed to his ear, still wearing his blood-soaked clothes because taking the time to change felt like a betrayal of everyone still fighting for their lives. The phone rang 5 times before Min-woo answered. "We're inbound," Min-woo said without preamble, his voice tight with exhaustion and pain. 3 minutes out, maybe less. We have Mi-sun. She's alive, breathing on her own." The relief that crashed over Dae-Jung was so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. His free hand shot out to brace against the wall, the only thing keeping him upright as the tension that had been holding him together for the past hour suddenly released all at once. "And Sung-Ho?" he managed to ask, though part of him didn't want to know, didn't want to hear confirmation of what he already suspected from the tone of Min-woo's voice. A pause, too long. The kind of silence that spoke volumes. "He's hurt," Min-woo said finally. "Lost a lot of blood. The wound in his side was worse than we thought and he pushed himself too hard keeping Mi-sun alive. The paramedics are working on him now, but Dae-Jung, It's bad. It's really bad. Dae-Jung closed his eyes. Get here fast. He ended the call and looked around the trauma bay waiting area. It was empty except for him. Too early in the morning for the usual crowd of worried family members, though that would change once the sun came up and the hospital opened its regular visiting hours. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of institutional green that made everyone look half dead even when they were healthy. Somewhere beyond the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only," surgeons were working on Imani. Somewhere in the building, Ha-Yoon was being admitted to the NICU, a team of specialists preparing to fight for her life. And in 3 minutes, maybe less, Sung-Ho would arrive with Mi-sun, and then all the pieces of this impossible night would finally be in the same place, if they all survived. That was still very much an open question. A surgeon emerged from the trauma bay, still wearing his blood-splattered surgical gown, his mask pulled down to reveal a tired but professional face. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and the kind of steady demeanor that suggested he'd seen every kind of emergency medicine had to offer. "Mr. Ri?" he asked, though there was no one else in the waiting area for Dae-Jung to be confused with. Dae-Jung straightened, forcing his exhausted body into something resembling alertness. "Yes, Ms. Cross is out of surgery," the surgeon said, and Dae-Jung felt his heart lurch. "We encountered significant complications. The hemorrhaging was more extensive than we initially assessed. We had to perform an emergency hysterectomy. The damage to her uterus was too severe to repair. But she's stable now. She's going to survive." The words hit Dae-Jung like a physical blow, each one carrying weight he hadn't expected. She was going to survive. Imani was going to survive. He hadn't realized until that moment how terrified he'd been that she wouldn't, that he'd lose her before he ever got the chance to tell her properly what she meant to him, before he could figure out how to be the kind of man who deserved someone like her. But the rest of what the surgeon had said, hysterectomy, damage too severe to repair, that carried implications that made his chest tighten for different reasons. "She can't have more children," he said. Not a question. A statement of fact that needed to be confirmed. "No," the surgeon said gently. "The hysterectomy was necessary to save her life, but it means she won't be able to carry another pregnancy. I'm sorry. I know that's difficult news." Dae-Jung thought about Imani. Fierce, complicated, impossible Imani, and tried to imagine how she'd react. She'd already been through so much, lost so much control over her own body, her own choices, had so many decisions made for her, about her, without her consent, and now this, one more thing taken from her, one more choice removed from her future. "Can I see her?" he asked. "She'll be in recovery for another hour at least," the surgeon said, "and she'll be unconscious for several more hours after that while the anesthesia wears off. But yes, once she's moved to a private room, you can sit with her. Someone will come get you when she's ready." Dae-Jung nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The surgeon patted his shoulder in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, then disappeared back through the double doors, leaving Dae-Jung alone with his thoughts and his blood-stained clothes and the sound of helicopter rotors announcing the arrival of the second aircraft. He moved to the windows overlooking the helipad, watching as the helicopter settled onto the landing pad with more difficulty than the first one had. The storm was still raging, making every maneuver dangerous. The doors opened, and medical personnel swarmed out, moving with controlled urgency. They brought out Sung-Ho first, on a gurney, with paramedics performing chest compressions. Dae-Jung's breath caught in his throat. His brother, his complicated, guilty, unexpectedly heroic brother, was coding, dying, maybe already dead. Then came another gurney, this one carrying the smallest incubator Dae-Jung had ever seen. Inside was Mi-sun, and even from this distance, even through the rain and the chaos, he could see her tiny chest rising and falling. Alive. His daughter was alive. But his brother might be dying to make it so. Dae-Jung met them at the elevator, his control finally shattering completely as he saw the medical team working frantically on Sung-Ho. Chest compressions, ventilation bag, someone calling out medications and dosages. The organized chaos of a code blue in progress. "Where's Dr. Cho?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. But he needed an anchor, needed someone who could tell him what was happening with all of his family scattered across this hospital. "Already in the NICU with Ha-Yoon," one of the paramedics said without breaking stride. "We'll take me son straight there. Your brother is going to surgery. The blade wound in his side nicked an artery. He's lost too much blood, but the surgeons here are good. If anyone can save him, they can. If, not when, if." Dae-Jung hated that word almost as much as he hated the word should. Both implied uncertainty, implied that the universe might choose differently than what he needed it to choose. He followed Mi-sun's incubator to the NICU, unable to do anything for Sung-Ho except trust that the medical team knew what they were doing. The elevator seemed to take forever, each second stretching into eternity as he watched the monitors attached to Mi-sun's tiny body, terrified that at any moment one of them would flatline, would announce that his daughter hadn't made it after all. But her heart kept beating, weak, irregular, but persistent. A fighter, just like her mother. The NICU was a revelation of controlled chaos, soft lighting despite the urgency, hushed voices despite the crisis, a carefully maintained atmosphere of calm that was probably meant to be soothing, but instead felt surreal given everything that had just happened. They settled Mi-sun into her station next to Ha-Yoon, the two incubators side by side like some kind of terrible mirror. Two impossibly small infants, both hooked up to more machines than seemed possible for bodies that size. Ventilators breathing for them, monitors tracking every heartbeat, every breath, every fluctuation in oxygen saturation, IV lines delivering medications and fluids, feeding tubes, temperature probes, a spider's web of medical technology keeping them tethered to life. Dr. Cho appeared beside him, looking as exhausted as he felt. Her usually immaculate appearance was destroyed. Blood on her clothes, her hair coming loose from its bun, dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many hours without sleep and too much adrenaline crash. "Both babies are stable," she said, and Dae-Jung heard the qualifier she didn't speak aloud. Stable for now, stable considering what they'd been through, stable but still critical. "Ha-Yoon is doing better than I dared hope. Her oxygen saturation has improved significantly since we got her on the ventilator. Her vital signs are strong." She paused and Dae-Jung braced himself for what was coming next. "Mi-sun is alive, which is more than I thought possible after seeing her on that yacht," Dr. Cho continued. "But she's going to have a harder road ahead. The prolonged oxygen deprivation before Sung-Ho got her breathing again. We won't know the full extent of the potential damage for weeks or months. Brain injury, developmental delays, cerebral palsy, vision or hearing problems, any or all of those are possible. Or she might be fine. Premature infants are remarkably resilient sometimes. We just have to wait and see." "But she's alive," Dae-Jung said, the words coming out more forcefully than he intended. "She's alive," Dr. Cho confirmed, and there was genuine wonder in her voice. "Your brother performed a miracle out there. I've seen a lot of impossible things in my career, but keeping a 15-ounce infant alive on a sinking yacht for over 20 minutes using nothing but CPR and determination, that's something I'll never forget." Dae-Jung moved closer to the incubators, studying his daughters through the clear plastic barriers. Ha-Yoon on the left, slightly larger, her chest rising and falling with the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator. Mi-sun on the right, even tinier, her skin so translucent he could see the delicate network of veins beneath. Both of them fighting, both of them alive against impossible odds, his daughters, both of them. Even though Ha-Yoon was Sung-Ho's biological child and Mi-sun was his, it didn't matter anymore. That distinction had died on the yacht when he'd climbed into that helicopter with Ha-Yoon and trusted his brother to save Mi-sun, when they'd each fought for the other's child as fiercely as they would have fought for their own. "How's Imani?" Dr. Cho asked quietly. "Out of surgery, stable. They had to—" His voice caught and he had to force the words out. "They had to perform a hysterectomy. The damage was too extensive." Dr. Cho closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, they were wet. "I was afraid of that. The hemorrhaging was catastrophic. I did everything I could to stop it on the boat, but field conditions, the trauma, she's lucky to be alive at all. She doesn't know yet, Dae-Jung said, about not being able to have more children. No, Dr. Cho agreed, and that's a conversation that needs to be handled very carefully. For some women, it's a relief, especially after a traumatic pregnancy. For others, it's devastating. With Imani, she trailed off, clearly trying to find the right words. Imani has had so much of her agency taken from her, so many choices made without her consent. This is one more thing she didn't get to decide for herself. Dae-Jung thought about all the ways he'd controlled Imani, all the choices he'd taken from her, trapping her with the pregnancy, manipulating her, keeping her prisoner in his world. And now, even when he was trying to save her, even when the medical intervention was necessary and life-saving, it still resulted in one more loss of control, one more limitation on her future that she hadn't chosen. I should be there when she wakes up, he said. We both should be. Me and Sung-Ho. She shouldn't have to hear it alone. Agreed, Dr. Cho said. But first you need to clean up. You look like you've been through a war, and you'll scare her if she wakes up and sees you covered in blood. Dae-Jung looked down at himself, clothes soaked through with a mixture of seawater and blood, torn and ruined beyond any hope of salvaging. He couldn't even remember whose blood it was anymore. His own, probably, from wounds he hadn't noticed receiving. Sung-Ho's from when he'd helped stabilize him on the yacht. Imani's from the emergency C-section, the attackers from the firefight, all of it mixed together until it was impossible to separate one person's sacrifice from another's. And Sung-Ho? He asked. Has anyone, do we know? He's in surgery now, Dr. Cho said gently. I'll make sure you're notified the moment there's any news. But Dae-Jung, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the damage was severe. He lost a massive amount of blood. Even if the surgeons can repair the arterial injury, there could be complications. Organ damage from the blood loss, infection from the wound being exposed to seawater. He's not out of danger yet. Dae-Jung nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His brother, his complicated, guilty, unexpectedly heroic brother, might die, might already be dying on an operating table somewhere in this building, and there was nothing Dae-Jung could do except wait and hope and make deals with a god he wasn't sure he believed in anymore. Go, Dr. Cho said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. Shower, change, get something to eat even if you don't want to. You're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. I'll stay here with the babies. I'll call you immediately if anything changes, I promise. It made sense, but the thought of leaving the hospital, even for an hour, made Dae-Jung's chest tighten with irrational panic. What if something happened while he was gone? What if one of the babies crashed? What if Imani woke up and he wasn't there? What if Sung-Ho died and he never got the chance to tell his brother that he was sorry, that he was grateful, that he loved him despite everything? I'll call you, Dr. Cho repeated, reading his face with the accuracy that came from too many years of dealing with worried family members in crisis. The moment anything changes, you have my personal number. I won't let anything happen to them without you knowing immediately. Reluctantly, Dae-Jung nodded. He took one last look at his daughters, so small, so fragile but alive, impossibly alive, and then forced himself to turn away and head for the exit. The drive back to his penthouse passed in a blur. Seoul was waking up, morning traffic beginning to build, the city oblivious to the drama that had played out on the ocean just hours before. People going to work, starting their ordinary days, completely unaware that Dae-Jung's entire world had been torn apart and was still in the process of either reassembling or falling to pieces completely. His penthouse felt wrong when he entered it. Too quiet, too empty. The last time he'd been here, Imani had still been pregnant, the babies still safe inside her, and the yacht journey had still been ahead of them. Now everything was different. The babies were born months too early, fighting for their lives in the NICU. Imani was recovering from surgery that had saved her life, but cost her the ability to have more children. Sung-Ho was on an operating table, possibly dying. And Grandmother Choi was still out there, still a threat, still believing in some prophecy that Dae-Jung didn't understand, but that had nearly cost him everything. He stripped off his ruined clothes, leaving them in a pile on the bathroom floor that would have scandalized his housekeeper if she'd been there to see it. The shower was scalding hot, almost painful against his skin, but he needed it. Needed to wash away the blood and the seawater and the scent of fear that seemed to have soaked into his pores. Under the water, finally alone, Dae-Jung allowed himself to break. He braced his hands against the tile wall and let the sobs come. Great. Shaking things that felt like they were tearing him apart from the inside. He cried for Imani, for what she'd endured, for his daughters, so tiny and fragile, for Sung-Ho, possibly dying because he'd been brave enough to stay behind, for himself, for the terror of potentially losing everyone who mattered to him all at once. When the water finally ran cold, he turned it off and stood there dripping, feeling emptied out but somehow steadier. The fear was still there, the worry was still there, but he'd released the worst of the pressure. He could function again. Could be what his family needed him to be. He dressed in clean clothes, forcing himself to eat something even though it tasted like ash, and then headed back to the hospital. His phone rang as he was getting into his car. "Sung-Ho is out of surgery," Dr. Cho said without preamble. "He survived. He's critical but stable. They repaired the arterial damage and gave him multiple transfusions. He's going to be in the ICU for at least a few days, but the surgeon thinks he'll pull through." The relief was so intense, Dae-Jung had to sit down in his car seat before his legs gave out. "Thank you," he managed to say. "Thank you for calling." "Get back here," Dr. Cho said. "Imani should be waking up soon. You'll want to be there." 4 days passed in a blur of hospital rooms and hushed conversations and the steady beeping of medical monitors that became the soundtrack to Dae-Jung's existence. 4 days of Imani, drifting in and out of consciousness, her body fighting to heal from trauma that should have killed her. 4 days of watching Ha-yoon grow incrementally stronger while Mi-sun struggled to make gains that seemed painfully small by comparison. 4 days of sitting beside Sung-Ho's bed in the ICU, watching his brother's chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance, waiting for him to open his eyes. 4 days of Dae-Jung barely leaving the hospital at all, surviving on coffee and whatever food the cafeteria provided, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs when exhaustion finally overcame his need to stay vigilant. On the morning of the 5th day, Imani finally woke up fully. Dae-Jung had been dozing in the chair beside her bed, his hand resting on the mattress near hers, close but not quite touching because he wasn't sure anymore if he had the right to touch her without permission. The sound of her voice pulled him from uneasy sleep. "My babies." Just 2 words, but they were clear and focused in a way her previous moments of semi-consciousness hadn't been. Dae-Jung jerked awake, his eyes flying open to find Imani looking directly at him, her dark eyes sharp despite the pain medication and exhaustion. "They're alive," he said immediately, standing and moving to her bedside, relief flooding through him so intensely it made his hands shake. "Both of them. Ha-yoon is doing remarkably well. Mi-sun is—" He hesitated, trying to find words that were honest but not devastating. "Mi-sun is fighting. She's having some complications, but she's alive and she's improving slowly." "I need to see them," Imani said, trying to sit up and immediately gasping at the pain the movement caused. Her hands flew to her abdomen, pressing against the bandages that covered her surgical incisions. "You will," Dae-Jung assured her, gently pressing her back against the pillows. "Soon, I promise. But first, there are things we need to talk about. Things you need to know about your surgery." The door opened and Sung-Ho entered, moving slowly but under his own power. He was pale, his movements careful as he protected his injured side, but he was conscious and walking and alive. The sight of him made something in Dae-Jung's chest loosen, tension he'd been carrying for days, fear that his brother wouldn't wake up, wouldn't survive, wouldn't be there to help navigate whatever came next. "You're awake," Sung-Ho said to Imani, and the relief in his voice was profound. "Thank God. We were starting to worry you'd sleep for a week." Dr. Cho followed him in. her professional demeanor firmly in place despite the exhaustion that still shadowed her features. She pulled up a chair on the other side of Imani's bed and took a deep breath, the kind of preparation that made Dae-Jung's stomach tighten because he knew what was coming. "Imani," Dr. Cho began, her voice gentle but clear, "when we operated to stop the hemorrhaging, we discovered that the damage to your uterus was too extensive to repair. The emergency C-section under those conditions, combined with the trauma from the bullet graze and the physical stress, it created a situation where your uterine wall was essentially shredded. We had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to save your life." Silence filled the room. Imani stared at Dr. Cho, processing the words, and Dae-Jung watched a series of emotions flicker across her face. Shock first, then grief, then something that looked like anger, and finally, something that surprised him, something that looked almost like acceptance. "I can't have more children," she said. Not a question, a statement, testing the words, seeing how they felt in her mouth. "No," Dr. Cho confirmed gently. "I'm so sorry." Imani was quiet for a long moment, her hands resting on her now flat abdomen where her daughters had lived for 23 weeks. Her fingers traced the edge of the bandages, feeling the evidence of what had been done to save her life. When she looked up, her eyes were clear and dry. "But I'm alive," she said. "Yes. And my daughters are alive." "Yes." "Then it was worth it," Imani said firmly, her voice gaining strength despite the weakness of her body. "I would have made the same choice if you'd asked me beforehand. My daughters needed me alive more than they needed me to be able to have more children someday. This isn't—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "It's not what I would have chosen in a perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world. We live in this one, where sometimes the only way to survive is to lose something, and I'd rather lose the possibility of future children than lose my actual children or my own life. Do you understand? This isn't a tragedy. It's a trade-off. And I'm okay with it." Dae-Jung felt something shift in his chest, something that had been tight and anxious for days finally beginning to loosen. Of course this was how she'd react. Fierce, practical, impossible Imani, choosing to frame her losses as victories, refusing to let circumstance define her as a victim. She'd survived being an escort, survived his manipulation, survived a dangerous pregnancy, survived giving birth on a sinking yacht. Of course she'd survive this too. He loved her so much in that moment it physically hurt. "Can I see them now?" Imani asked. "My babies?" "Wheelchair," Dr. Cho said, standing. "You're not walking yet, but yes, I think seeing them will do all of you good." Getting Imani into the wheelchair took coordination and time, her body still weak from surgery and blood loss, every movement causing pain that she tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. Dae-Jung wanted to help, but didn't know if his touch would be welcome, so he hovered uselessly while Dr. Cho and a nurse managed the transfer with professional efficiency. The journey to the NICU felt endless despite being only 2 floors down. The elevator seemed to move in slow motion. The corridors stretched impossibly long, but finally they were standing, or in Imani's case, sitting, in front of the 2 incubators that held Ha-Yoon and Mi-sun. Imani broke down completely. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside her, raw and painful, the sound of a mother seeing her children for the first time and confronting the reality of how fragile they were, how close they'd come to dying, how much they still had to fight through. Her hands pressed against the clear plastic of the incubators, desperate to touch them, but unable to reach through the barriers that kept them safe. "They're so small," she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. "They're so small and fragile, and I couldn't protect them. I couldn't keep them safe inside me where they belonged. I failed them." "No," Sung-Ho said quietly, moving to stand beside her wheelchair. "You kept them alive. That's all that matters. Look at them, Imani. They're here. They're breathing. They're fighting. You gave them that chance by holding on as long as you did. They're warriors," Dae-Jung added, his voice rough. "Just like their mother." A nurse approached, her expression kind. "Would you like to touch them? Through the incubator ports. You have to be very gentle. Their skin is extremely sensitive at this stage, but skin-to-skin contact is important for their development. Imani nodded, unable to speak through her tears. The nurse helped position her wheelchair and guided her hand through the port to Ha-Yoon's incubator first. Imani's finger, looking impossibly large compared to the infant, touched Ha-Yoon's tiny hand with infinite gentleness. Ha-Yoon's fingers curled around Imani's. A reflex, perhaps, but Imani didn't care. She stared at that tiny hand gripping her finger, at the miniature fingernails, at the translucent skin that showed every vein beneath, and something in her expression transformed from grief to wonder. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered through her tears. "Mama's here. I'm right here. I'm so sorry it took me so long to come see you, but I'm here now." She touched Mi-sun next, her other hand reaching through the second incubator's port. Mi-sun was less responsive, her tiny hand remaining limp beneath Imani's touch, but her chest continued its steady rise and fall, the monitors showing a heartbeat that persisted despite everything. "Hi, sweetie," Imani said, her voice breaking. "I'm here. Mama's not leaving. Ever. Do you hear me? I'm never leaving you again." They stayed there for a long time, the four adults watching the two infants fight their way toward survival. Eventually, Dr. Cho gently suggested that Imani needed to return to her room to rest, that she was still recovering and couldn't push herself too hard. Back in her hospital room, with the brothers flanking her bed like guards, Dr. Cho pulled out a folder that Dae-Jung recognized, the paternity results. He'd almost forgotten about them in the chaos of everything else, but of course they existed, had been processed during Imani's surgery using the blood samples they'd taken. "There are other things we need to discuss," Dr. Cho said, including the paternity results. Both brothers tensed visibly. Imani looked between them, then back at Dr. Cho, her expression unreadable. "Tell us," she said. Dr. Cho opened the folder. Though Dae-Jung suspected she'd already memorized the contents, Ha-Yoon is Sung-Ho's biological daughter, Mi-sun is Dae-Jung's. The irony of it hit Dae-Jung like a physical blow. Ha-Yoon, the stronger twin, the one who'd been stable enough to fly in the first helicopter, belonged to Sung-Ho. Mi-sun, the weaker twin, the one who'd nearly died multiple times, was his. And on that sinking yacht, he'd saved Ha-Yoon while Sung-Ho had saved Mi-sun. Each brother had fought to keep the other's biological child alive, had risked everything for a baby that didn't share their DNA. "It doesn't matter," Dae-Jung heard himself say, the words coming out with more force than he'd intended. "They're both ours. Biology doesn't change that." "Agreed," Sung-Ho said immediately. "Both daughters, both fathers. That's how this works." Imani looked between them, fresh tears streaming down her face, but these seemed different than the earlier ones. These looked almost like tears of relief, or maybe hope. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain in a way Dae-Jung had never heard from her before. "Yes," they said in unison, and the synchronization of their response would have been funny under different circumstances. And in that moment, despite everything, despite the trauma and the pain and the fear and the losses, Imani felt something she hadn't felt in years, something she'd thought she'd lost forever during her years as an escort, during her time trapped in Dae-Jung's gilded cage. She felt hope, hope that maybe, somehow, they could make this impossible situation work, hope that her daughters would survive and thrive. Hope that the men who'd controlled and manipulated her were becoming something different, something better. Hope that the family they were building from the wreckage of everything that had come before might actually have a chance. "There's more," Dr. Cho said, her expression becoming more serious, "about why the 5 families wanted the babies so badly, about why Grandmother Choi was willing to risk everything to get them." She pulled out another document, this one older, the paper yellowed with age. Korean text filled the page, with an English translation typed beneath. "It's called The Prophecy of the Blood Moon Twins," Dr. Cho said, "an ancient prediction passed down through the criminal families of Seoul for generations." Dr. Cho laid the document on Imani's bedside table where all of them could see it. The Korean characters looked beautiful and ancient, brushstrokes that had been made generations ago and carefully preserved through the years. The English translation beneath was typed on a separate sheet, the font clinical and modern, creating a strange juxtaposition between old prophecy and new reality. "When blood moon rises over soul's heart," Dr. Cho read aloud, her voice taking on an almost ceremonial quality. "Two daughters born of foreign womb and warring blood shall hold the 5 families' fate. One daughter will unite the underworld in lasting peace, the other will drown it in blood and fire. The mother's choice at the moment of testing will determine which path Korea walks for the next generation." Silence filled the room. Imani stared at the words, trying to process what they meant, what they implied about her daughter's futures. "There was a blood moon the night they were born," Dae-Jung said quietly. "I saw it through the hospital windows during your surgery, a lunar eclipse. The moon turned red." "Foreign womb, that's me," Imani said, her voice hollow. "And warring blood, that's you two, brothers who were rivals." "The families believe this prophecy has been fulfilled," Dr. Cho explained. "They believe Ha-Yoon and Mi-sun are the twins it speaks of, that one of them will unite the criminal underworld of Seoul, bringing peace and prosperity to all the families, and the other will destroy it all, bringing chaos and bloodshed." "That's insane," Imani said, her voice rising. "They're babies, tiny, premature babies fighting just to survive. They're not weapons, they're not tools. They're children." "The families don't see it that way," Sung-Ho said, his expression grim. "To them, the prophecy is absolute truth. It's guided their decisions for generations, shaped alliances and wars, and now they believe it's come to pass. So my daughters are supposed to either unite or destroy the criminal underworld?" Imani's voice was sharp with anger. "And they'll be hunted for this? Targeted? Used as pawns in some centuries-old power game?" "Yes," Dr. Cho said simply. "Unless you remove them from the prophecy's reach entirely." Imani looked between the three of them, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You want us to leave Korea?" "It's the only way," Dae-Jung said, and saying the words felt like cutting out a piece of himself. "The families will never stop. They'll hunt you. Use you. Try to control which daughter becomes which part of the prophecy. Your daughters will never have normal lives, will never be able to make their own choices. Unless we disappear," Imani finished. "Leave everything behind. Start over somewhere the prophecy can't touch us." "New Zealand," Sung-Ho said, "or Australia. Somewhere far enough that the family's reach doesn't extend. Somewhere we can raise them in peace." Imani's hands moved to her stomach, pressing against the bandages as if she could still feel her daughters there. "What about your businesses? Your empires? Everything you've built?" Dae-Jung looked at his brother, and something passed between them, the same wordless communication that had happened on the yacht, but deeper now, weighted with everything they'd survived together. "I've spent my life building an empire," Dae-Jung said slowly, "making myself powerful, untouchable, feared. But what's it worth if I lose them? What's the point of power if I can't protect the people who matter most?" "I never wanted this life anyway," Sung-Ho added. "I fell into it because of family obligation, because it was expected. But I've always wanted something different. Freedom, peace, a chance to be something other than what we were born to be." "We leave," Dae-Jung said, looking directly at Imani. "All of us. Together. We wait until the babies are strong enough to travel. Another few weeks, maybe a month or two, and then we disappear. New identities, new lives, a fresh start." "And the families?" Imani asked. "They'll just let us go." "No," Dr. Cho said, "which is why you'll have to be declared dead. All of you." "A boat explosion, perhaps. Bodies lost at sea. It's the only way to make them stop looking." The enormity of what they were proposing settled over Imani like a weight. Leave Korea. Leave everything behind. Fake their deaths. Start completely over in a country where no one knew them, where their daughters could grow up free from prophecy and destiny and the violence that had marked their first moments of life. It was insane, impossible, and somehow It was also exactly what they needed to do. "Okay," she said. "Okay, we do it. But I'm setting terms." Both brothers leaned forward, listening. "When my daughters are safe," Imani said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "When they're healthy and we're settled in our new life, you don't get to make decisions for me anymore. Not about where I live, not about who I see, not about anything. I get my life back, my agency, my choices, even if I have to fight you for it. Understand?" Dae-Jung felt something in his chest twist, guilt and respect and love all tangled together. "Understood. Understood," Sung-Ho echoed. "And one more thing," Imani added, looking between them with an expression that was equal parts vulnerable and fierce. "I love you both. I don't know how that works. I don't know what that means for the future, but I'm not choosing between you. Not now. Maybe not ever. So you both need to figure out if you can live with that, because I'm done pretending I don't feel what I feel." Dae-Jung looked at his brother, and for once, there was no rivalry in the look that passed between them, just understanding, just acceptance of an impossible situation that had somehow become their reality. "We'll figure it out," Dae-Jung said. "However we need to. Whatever works for all of us." Dr. Cho stood, giving them privacy for the moment they were creating. "I'll start making arrangements. Death certificates, new identities, travel documents for infants. It will take time, but I have contacts who can help. People who owe me favors." After she left, the three of them sat in silence, Imani in the hospital bed, the brothers flanking her on either side. Outside, Seoul hummed with life, oblivious to the drama unfolding in this private room. Inside, a family was being born from impossibility and trauma and choices made under fire. 3 weeks, Dae-Jung said after a long moment, maybe 4. That's how long Dr. Cho thinks we need to wait before the babies are strong enough to travel. "And in that time?" Imani asked. "We stay here. We guard them. We prepare." Sung-Ho's voice was firm, "And we make sure Grandmother Choi believes we're still under her surveillance, still vulnerable, so she doesn't suspect we're planning to disappear." 4 weeks, Imani repeated, the words sounding both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. 4 weeks until we leave everything behind and start over." 4 weeks until we're free, Dae-Jung corrected. The days that followed fell into a rhythm, exhausting, tense, but somehow hopeful. Imani recovered slowly, her strength returning incrementally as her body healed from the trauma. The babies grew stronger too, Ha-Yoon making steady progress, while Mi-sun fought for every gain with the determination that had kept her alive on that yacht. On day 18, Ha-Yoon was taken off the ventilator. She breathed on her own for the first time. Tiny breaths that were irregular but persistent. Imani cried when she held her daughter for the first time, doing kangaroo care with Ha-Yoon pressed against her bare chest, the infant's impossibly small body warm against her skin. On day 23, Mi-sun followed, graduating from the ventilator to supplemental oxygen. She was smaller, weaker, but alive and improving. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis, though they warned that developmental delays were likely given the trauma she'd endured. On day 27, Min-woo arrived with the documents they'd need, death certificates that looked official enough to fool anyone who checked, new passports under different names, travel documents for 2 infants listed as premature but stable enough for medical transport. "New Zealand was easier than Australia," Min-woo explained, spreading the documents across Imani's hospital room table. "Less scrutiny, more acceptance of medical refugees. You'll enter as a family seeking specialized care for premature twins. Once you're there, these other documents will establish your new identities permanently." "And here?" Sung-Ho asked. "The families?" "I've leaked information that you're planning to move to a secure facility in Busan," Min-woo said. "Grandmother Choi's people are watching the wrong location. When the boat explosion happens next week, already arranged to look like an attack by a rival family, they'll find just enough evidence to confirm your deaths. Bodies too damaged to identify, but clearly your size and builds. Dental records that will match thanks to a very expensive forger." "You've thought of everything," Dae-Jung said. "I've spent 3 weeks thinking of nothing else," Min-woo replied. "This has to be perfect. One mistake and they'll know you survived, and then there's no safe place anywhere." On day 32, Dr. Cho declared the babies stable enough for transport. Ha-yoon weighed 3 pounds, 2 ounces. Mi-sun weighed 2 pounds, 11 ounces. Both were tiny but fighting. Both had passed the critical tests that meant they could survive outside the intensive NICU environment with proper medical support. "You'll have a medical team traveling with you," Dr. Cho explained. "Neonatal nurses who specialize in premature infant care. They'll stay with you for the first month in New Zealand, making sure the babies remain stable. After that, you'll transition to local specialists." The night before they left, Imani stood at the NICU observation window one last time, looking at her daughters in their incubators. Tomorrow they would be taken from this hospital and transported to a private airfield. Tomorrow they would leave Korea forever, leave behind everything they'd known, become different people with different names and different histories. Tomorrow the prophecy would lose its power over them because the twins it spoke of would cease to exist, at least as far as the families were concerned. Dae-Jung appeared beside her, his reflection visible in the glass. "Second thoughts?" "A million of them," Imani admitted, "but also certainty. This is right. For them, for us. Whatever we're leaving behind, what we're gaining is worth more." "A chance," Dae-Jung said. "That's all it is. A chance for them to choose their own futures, to be more than pawns in someone else's game. That's all anyone needs," Imani replied. "A chance." Sung-Ho joined them, his recovery complete enough that he moved without pain now, though the scar on his side would remain forever, a reminder of what he'd endured to save Mi-sun. "The jet leaves at dawn," he said. "Medical team is already in position. Min-woo has confirmed that Grandmother Choi's surveillance is focused on Busan. We have a clear window." "Then we're really doing this," Imani said. "We're really doing this," Dae-Jung confirmed. They stood together in silence. 3 people who'd been brought together by manipulation and circumstance, who'd been forced into impossible situations and somehow found something real in the midst of chaos. Tomorrow they would become someone else. Tomorrow they would disappear. But tonight they were still themselves, still here, still together, still fighting. "Whatever happens next," Imani said quietly, "whatever challenges we face in New Zealand, whatever struggles the babies go through, we face it together, all of us, as a family, not as captor and captive, not as rivals, as partners, as equals, or I walk away and do this alone." "Together," Dae-Jung said. "As equals," Sung-Ho added. "As family," Imani finished, and in that moment, standing before the window that showed 2 tiny infants fighting their way toward survival, they made a choice. Not the choice the prophecy demanded, not the choice the families expected, but their own choice, made freely, made together, to walk away from destiny and toward something better, something they'd build themselves. Something earned rather than inherited. Tomorrow they would disappear, but tonight they were exactly who they needed to be, together.